Since we have about 45 minutes, I thought let's quickly move into the questions. You need no introductions. But let me ask you what every conference organizer at this moment will ask someone who he partners with. What are your 3 takeaways from this dialogue?
No, I can't believe it's 10 years. No, that's not a takeaway. That's just you and me talking. What are the 3 takeaways? Well, look, the first takeaway would be perhaps more than any other dialogue till now. I can see, on the faces and the behavior, in the radiation of everybody who comes here, this sense that there is a huge political change. I pull back that word political. There's a huge change happening. Change always happens, but somehow this year, that sense of it is so sharp, so overwhelming in a way. And my takeaway, which yesterday evening, we had a dinner where Samir was there. And when he asked me to sum up the dinner, I share with you what my summary was. I said, today, all of us are renegotiating everything. Not just our politics, not just our strategy, not just our country position, not just our trade. We are actually in the midst of an enormous renegotiation. And it's actually when you renegotiate so drastically that this term, the global order is changing, is for real. It is for real this time. My second takeaway was on the tech side. Many years ago, when I was approximately your age, and I was doing my PhD, I focused on the impact of nuclear technology on politics, on diplomacy, on international relations. Because at that point of time, we are now talking mid-70s here, at that point of time, I was understandably led to believe that there's going to be nothing as big as nuclear technology when it comes to changing the world. This is the ultimate. This is like the term didn't exist then. This was like an end of history kind of change. Today, when I look at the potential implications of AI, nuclear technology is a walk in the park. So, because nuclear technology at the end of the day impacted power balances, it impacted, well, to some extent energy, it impacted who was up, who was down. It did not impact our daily lives. It did not impact the way we think, we behave, we relate, we project. So, I can tell you, when I think of Raisina at 15, I can't even imagine it. That's how big a change, I would say. And the third, I still came away with that feeling, my third takeaway, was, look, at the end of the day, we are a diverse world. I see the diversity in front of me. Yes, we are all inhabitants of the planet, but we have our history, we have a culture, we have a language, we have our faith. It's important to recognize that. If you sort of erase it or you level it, in a way, it's almost disrespectful of everything that human history has achieved. So for me, the diversity of the world today, the technology, the cusp at which we stand today, and that enormous sense of change, those would be my 3 takeaways.
And 3 things that surprised you or perplexed you at the dialogue? Could be a panel, could be an incident, could be someone just walking up to you.
Well, look, I attended some panels. I was meeting all my counterparts. I mean, other ministers and senior people journey here. It's only reasonable that you spend time with them. So I probably didn't attend as many panels as many of you would have done. So if you're asking me, okay, which speaker or, what was the most, I won't say unexpected, but, novel.
Surprising. Surprising.
To watch a Japanese speaker being so immensely provocative, that was surprising. I think most of you know which panelist,
session you're talking about.
which session I was talking about. And in a way, that's the upside down world in which we are living. I had an interview recently with the Financial Times, and one of the thoughts which came to it was a freewheeling conversation, but one of the thoughts which came to my mind was, I told the guy after we'd had our first masala dosa, that, multipolar world used to be the Indian talking point. Today it's the American talking point. We used to hear, it's terrible to abstain on an important issue like Ukraine. I just saw a UN Security Council resolution where the Americans and Russians voted together, and the Europeans, the Brits and the French abstained. So, there could be others as well. I mean, when I look back at our own history, there was a time when the Western world used to think Indians are very preachy. I think today we think it's the other way around. So we pride ourselves as the pragmatic, realistic people who get things done. So the world's not what it used to be.
So what are the three big changes?
Look,
I'm staying with three here. Right?
I would say change number one is the country, the most, use whatever word you want to, most important country, but certainly quantitatively, qualitatively, the most influential country, the United States. When a country like the United States changes so profoundly, I think there's no part of the world which is not going to feel its impact, and no domain or dimension which is going to be impervious to that change. So I think the change in America is a very, very fundamental change. I mean, you may like it, you may not, that's a different matter. But we have to recognize that change has happened. The second change, to my mind, is a much more gradual one, which is the relative weight of countries. If you look at the world like a shareholding, the distribution of shares has changed, over time. So if you were to draw up a practical list of, okay, which are the 20 most important countries 80 years ago after the Second World War, 60 years, 20 years after that, 20 more years after that, I think you can see actually that change happening every 2 decades, 3 decades. 2 decades, definitely you will see some ups and downs. That's more of a trend. And, there's China, there's India, there are others. Relatively speaking, the influence of the Western world has been balanced off by many others. So in that sense, we have today the makings of a multipolar world, or a much more diverse and balanced world. And to me, the third change is that there is actually a very intense backlash to globalization. Not the reality of supply chains which are transnational, but globalization as an ideological conviction and agenda, where you can have private, it's like if there can be private equity in ideology. A set of players say, we own the world. We are the masters of globalization. And we will tell you what is right and what is wrong and what is good and what is not. And we will decide the cultural correctness of this world. And I think today you're seeing that backlash. It's not just a backlash in America. It's not just, a Brexit or, left-wing, right-wing politics. I can tell you, as a person who travels, to practically every continent across the world, I spend half my year out of the country. That feeling is very pervasive in Africa and Latin America and the Pacific Islands, that people want their identity, their diversity to be recognized. They don't think it's a flat world. And definitely, because a flat world means somebody out there controls it. They don't like that.
Great. So now I'm going to come to all of you, and I'm going to take one question from each side of the room. Like I said, please don't repeat the question or belabor the point that you want to make. And remember, we have tried and get 10, 15, 20 of you. We want it to be quick, fast, rapid. No speeches, only questions. No sermonizing, only questions. Right? And that's the. And please don't read off a phone. Speak from your mind. Ask the question that comes to you. Please don't give me prepared text. I'm not interested in speeches. Okay, so let's start with you first.
Thank you, Samir. My name is Marina Domushkina. Thank you for having me third year in a row. I've been alumna and I've been young fellow in 2023. Minister, last year you wrote a really important book, Why Bharat Matters. Also, thank you for signing. And there was a great clip about India being a peacemaker and not taking the sides. So the question is very relevant. Where do you see India's role right now in the current peacemaking? And what it would be? Would it be a peacekeeping forces maybe? Would it be a contribution to confidence building measures? And I will end here because I think that India should play a role because it's a global power in your side, in Indo-Pacific and in Asia in general. So please elaborate, and thank you for having me again. And I hope this question will still bring me next year.
She's a alumni from Ukraine. She was there in 23, and she's very dear. So,
I think the word you used, peacemaker, is a very strong word. Let me put it, or let me describe what we have tried to do. We have always believed, that this conflict in Ukraine is tragic. It will not have a good ending. People are dying, for reasons and purposes which, when we look back, as we have looked back on many other conflicts where there have been high casualties, you actually ask yourself, why did we let that happen? So we've always felt it's important to find, a negotiated way. And a negotiated way obviously has to be a negotiation between the parties. So we have tried on one side to, to speak to the Russian leadership, on the other hand to engage the Ukrainian leadership, to tell one that, it cannot be resolved by war, and to tell the other that, look, you have to talk, you have to engage the other party. By lining up everybody else in the world, other than the other party, you're not going to get a solution. So we have been in favor of not just negotiations, but actually, direct negotiations, you can say, in a way. We think that's the way. But if I put that aside, at the, in a sort of larger sense, we have tried to take a common sense position. A common sense position that this war must end. It is disastrous, obviously, for the two parties concerned, but it is hugely damaging for the rest of the world. And we see today that positions we took in 22, 23, which quite honestly were not exactly applauded in every part of the world, there's much greater acceptance today. And in that sense, I mean, there are episodes where we've tried to help on the Black Sea grain corridor. I think last year I spoke about it.
I was one of negotiators, so I know exactly. Thank you so much for that.
Negotiators for that.
Yeah. So look, I'm not going into that. I think at the end of the day, there has to be a global common sense approach to this conflict. And the global common sense approach has to be that there has to be a negotiation. And ultimately, other than the parties, it's for the parties and, anybody else who has the ability to influence that negotiation, to take a position. But eventually people feel, okay, India contributed by awakening common sense about a conflict, about a very tragic and a very bloody conflict. I think we would have done some good.
Okay. Go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Samir, for the invitation, and thank you, sir, for having us here. Another question from Ukraine. My name is Irina Krasnoshtan, and this will continue this conversation. You have highlighted the special role that India has, speaking both to Ukraine and Russia, and you have also spoken about, tragic consequences of the war. One of them is that there are thousands of children that are deported to Russia, Ukrainian children. Do you think that India, in this very unique role, can play a role in getting these kids back to Ukraine?
Look, a conflict like this has many dimensions, many aspects of it. I don't know if I really can comment on a particular aspect of it. Obviously, if children have got separated, that itself is a cause for enormous distress. But I would say right now there's a kind of a big issue which needs to be resolved. If that big issue is resolved, when there is a conflict of this magnitude, you're not going to fix it by fixing parts of the problem. You're going to fix it by fixing the main problem, and then the parts will, different aspects of it will happen. But I understand the concern that you have expressed.
Your question, please. No, go ahead.
Hello, Senator. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Last year, I asked you about the agenda of foreign policy after the election, and you make laugh about me last year.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
Okay.
So maybe this year you can tell me what exactly is the agenda of foreign policy for India. And as a researcher on India and Israel, I'm interested in studying new trends in India's foreign policy. In your point of view, what areas India global engagement will be important to deeper research?
It's a bit of a problem when people throw at you what you said last year, especially if you don't remember what you said last year. It's even more awkward if people quote you and you're not exactly sure what you wrote or said. But having said that, look, what is our agenda?
So you're left between twice.
Yeah. No, but what is our agenda? At the end of the day, we are a large country. We are a country which has had its problems, I would say, difficult periods in our history. And today, we see the prospect for great growth. We see decades ahead of sustained growth in this country. We look at the world as an opportunity. We look at the world very optimistically. We think there are partners and possibilities in this world, and that more we engage the world, the greater will be the growth at home. So in many ways, almost everything we do in foreign policy, to me, has to have some impact or some relevance at what is happening in terms of national development at home. Now, it doesn't mean that we are not interested in shaping the world, because considering how interconnected the world is, what happens at home and what happens abroad, the line is a very thin line. So, most of all, like any country, we focus on the neighborhood. The neighborhood, as is often the case, can have its challenges. It also has its relationships and its strengths. I think overall today we have a much more integrated, much more connected, much more, in a way, a stronger sense of solidarity and commonness in our immediate neighborhood. Then we have extended neighborhoods in all four directions. In the Gulf, in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, in Central Asia, and in the South, in the Indian Ocean territories. And we want to bring the extended neighborhoods much closer to us, which is not a rhetoric. I mean, you've got to do things to make that happen. When you look beyond, it's a world of big powers. It's very important to have good relations with all of them, to get an optimal positioning. Sometimes it's easy. The faraway ones are often less of a problem. That's a simple correlation between geography and politics. Sometimes the ones more proximate are the ones with whom there's more competition. But how do you manage the equation among big powers and between big powers and ourselves? That's the next level. And today, I mean, if I were to think of a 2030, because we sort of have a vision of 2047. 2047 is now 22 years away from us. So how do I, plan for, where will I be? I have to imagine it and prepare for it. And I do think that we will have a much bigger, much broader global footprint. So I am preparing today for a Latin America and a Caribbean and a Pacific Island and a West Africa and a Mongolia, which may not be proximate, which may not be that big on my immediate priorities, but as a medium, long term, it's a relationship that I need to have. So you've got to do the short, medium, long, all at the same time. And I think what happens, when you are a government, last year we had an election since all of us met last. To be a third-term government, you have the experience, the learnings of 2 terms. You know much more sure-footedly where you're going, the pace at which you're going, how you want to go. So I think we have that advantage today of people, who are in power for more than a decade. And I think that helps us really look ahead with a much more confident, long view of our prospects.
Thank you, Lauren. Let me know Christoph.
Yeah, I'm Christoph. I'm from Poland. Thank you very much for having us here. It's a great organization and great hospitality. That's 2 things which rarely go together. So thank you very much for having us.
When someone praises so much, there's a difficult question coming.
No, it's a very simple one. Because I think that we are on the verge of the new nuclear era. There are many more countries who would like to develop the civil nuclear capabilities, including my country. There is a discussion about nuclear sharing, nuclear shields, and many more countries who would like to develop also the nuclear capabilities of their own. So given the history of India, how do you think it would impact the security of the world to come?
I'm sorry, what do you do?
I'm in the think tank and I used to be in the government.
Which government?
Polish government.
Okay. I'm asking you this because interestingly, I was discussing it with one of my colleague ministers today, the problem. Yesterday.
Polish
whatever.
one?
No, he isn't here. So
I mean, the question here was, do you have a listening device, not the identity?
So I'll tell you something very ironical. I began my interest, my profession almost like a nuclear proliferation analyst. Okay, that's what my MPhil and my PhD were on. In the 1960s and 70s, there was something called proliferation literature. It was an industry in itself. Okay, it's very interesting if you look at the, say, 72, 73, 74, this post-NPT, okay? Starting from mid-60s till late 70s, there's a lot of literature on who are the likely proliferators. Actually, the people literature identified and the people who made the bomb were quite different. In the early 70s, there was a lot, even late, mid-60s, there was a lot of worry about Germany, Japan, Brazil, Argentina. You'd be surprised at some of the European countries whose programs were flagged at that time. Some of the East Asian countries whose programs were flagged. So it's today very instructive to read that or remember that, because at that time, particularly USA and USSR, which then existed, found ways of dealing with this problem by extension of their protection, of their umbrella. So I would urge you to go back, just look at that literature. You may get some very interesting insights going back to the early years or the years before the NPT was actually signed.
But, yesterday when we were in a off-the-record conversation.
You are on the record now, but go ahead. No, but go ahead, no problem.
We heard in that off-the-record conversation the possibility, I'm just sharing, I'm not mentioning who it was. Actually, in the Chatham House conversation, we did hear also through the conference about this moment being a moment where some of us in different parts of the world might be considering whether it might not be a bad idea to have that capability.
By whom?
By various countries, those who don't have nuclear capabilities. I mean, is that something that is serious, or is it just for you casual thinking?
No, you are getting me started because as I said, there's a whole
history to it.
No, there's a whole domain. There's an industry here. There was a proposition. There was at that time, particularly by Kenneth Waltz, in a sense that the more they are, the more balanced they would be, and there would be a complicated multi-nuclear
deterrence architecture.
Yes, correct. But the politics of the world did not accept that. They wanted to, they were uneasy with that, possibly with a reason. So essentially what you have had in reality is every time you have added a nuclear power, that nuclear power feels, okay, we are in now, no more. So it's one of those cases where success normally instills a desire to be the last passenger
on the bus.
Utkarsh?
Good evening, sir. Thanks very much for your time. I am the founder of Network Capital and a PhD candidate at Oxford, where I study the space economy. I wanted to ask, how do you think new advancements in space will change India's approach towards international relations, and how might it shape the global world order?
Is this part of your research?
Sort of.
Well, look, you can already see that happening in different ways. I mean, you can see that happening in terms of communication. The whole idea that you can have a sustainable, viable communication system based out of low orbit space assets today stands proven. It may be expensive, relatively speaking, but it still applies to some parts of the world or works, at least for premium payers in a way. So one part of it is commercial. I think a big part of it is non-commercial. Again, if you have the ability to, we used to talk of standoff weapons. Today you have people who fly drones thousands of kilometers. But the key is again the ISR, which you need there to locate targets. So, when we say that we are on the cusp of a big change, I think part of that is really the domain of space. Space has been relatively limited as a player in a competition on the ground. That is clearly about to change.
Ankush?
By the way, so is underwater.
Ankush.
Good evening, Ankush from India. Thank you, RF, for this opportunity, and thank you, Honorable Minister, for joining us today. Over the past 2 or 3 days during this conference, we've seen a lot of questions being posed to the MEO officials about what is India's stance on various developments in countries that surround us. My question is slightly inward-looking. In your opinion, what can private individuals, influential individuals and private institutions in India, what can they focus on, given what is happening outside, to make sure that India's stance in the global stage is strengthened? Thank you.
Look, it's not just India. I mean, in any country, a country is not just its government. Obviously, in foreign policy, it's primarily the government. But there's so much today which is done by entities outside the government. And there are countries where you have businesses which have become so big that they are almost as influential as the government themselves. Today, in one of my panels, people mentioned some of these mega tech companies as such an example. I would say in India today, what can private individuals or civil society or private sector do? I think they can make a big difference because they do shape opinion, they do add to the thinking, they do help create options. Because when you talk of comprehensive national power, comprehensive national power doesn't mean the assets and the capabilities under the command of the government. In fact, a large part of CNP is outside the control, the literal control of the government. So we need, the stronger the sense of nationhood, the greater the commonality of purpose. And that's why it's very important, I feel, to explain national security and foreign policy within the country. That, there are, I've had examples, I don't want to go into it now, where people who have nothing to do with the government have done great services for the nation. And they did it on their own. I mean, they didn't even expect recognition or reward. But if they are motivated, they will and they can. So I think there's a kind of a collective spirit whose sort of strengthening really helps the country.
So we have only about 15 minutes. Can I collect 5 questions?
In which case I'll have to write it down.
Yeah, just write down. I'll collect 5 questions and then I'll come back to you. So Rizo, let's start with you.
Thank you, Samir. Thank you, Minister. My question is related to Afghanistan. I'm from Afghanistan. India recently began engaging with the Taliban, and then Pakistan has also lodged complaints with the UN, or is planning to do it, for engaging with terrorist groups. Is your engagement with the Taliban purely about national security, or do you see a role for yourself, or do you see a role for India in helping foster a more stable Afghanistan and talking to them and cooperating with them in a pragmatic way that can give basic liberties to the people there as well?
Lilith?
Yeah, thank you. Lilith from Armenia. Honorable Minister, Armenia and Azerbaijan have recently announced the finalization of all points of the peace treaty, and with many countries, including US, Russia, Iran, and China, announcing their support for peace. and calling on all actors to sign the agreement as soon as possible. And on the other hand, Azerbaijan simultaneously has escalated its rhetorics against Armenia. And since India maintains a clear position supporting the stability of the South Caucasus, do you see the possibility of India to issue its own statement in this regard?
Well, all of you are coming with very particular agendas, but go ahead. Igor.
Hello, I'm Igor. I'm an environmental and international economist from Russia. In some of your recent interviews, you said that India has never supported the dollarization. Could you elaborate a little bit on this? Because the dollarization have many different meanings, and maybe like creation of new artificial currency, like within BRICS, or there may be promotion of some alternative payment systems internationally, or there may be promotion of payments in national currencies. So what is Indian position on this?
What is the Indian position on de-dollarization? I think he's probably responded to that 5 times, but he'll do it again. Don't worry. But I'm just saying I know the answer. So go ahead.
My name is Rufus from Nairobi, Kenya. I have a very specific question regarding the utility of summits on Africa, because this has become quite on the calendar of many countries. So maybe what is India's position in terms of the utility of these African summits? And because the last time that India had one with Africa was back in 2015, is there something being planned, and are they still fit for purpose? Thank you.
Okay. We have had 4. Last one. I think let's get Yanita in. Or let's get Yanita in. Let's yield. I want diversity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Samir. Such an honor, Minister. This is Meena from Malaysia.
Yourself, yeah?
Yes, I'm an analyst with ISIS Malaysia, a think tank under the Prime Minister's office. I'd like to ask you, what do you think is the single most biggest challenge or impediment to India's deeper functional ties with ASEAN and Southeast Asian countries?
Oh, that's
Thank
a
you so
short
much.
question. You can quickly ask one more. You can quickly ask one more, but thank you for your generosity.
Thank you very much. I think I'll just make it very quick. My day job is mergers and acquisitions. My question is directly related to the perception of various boards across the world about India. They're aware of India, but they do not know India. And that actually restricts a lot of risk capital to flow into India. I just want to quickly ask, is there a plan to accelerate how we market ourselves, and how can we create, let's say, India as a global market?
With your specific community, with the big capital holders, right?
For the capital holders and also institutions, businesses to invest into India.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's enough.
Sure. So here are the responses. Yes, we engage Taliban, but 2 points here. One, Taliban is in control of Afghanistan. And 2, we would like to do something to help the Afghan people. And to help the Afghan people, we obviously have to engage whoever is in control. Now, since 2021, they went through a huge food crisis. We gave 500,000 tons of wheat. They had, during COVID, a vaccine crisis. We basically supplied the vaccines. They actually had a locust invasion. We gave the chemicals to deal with the locusts. There are today, there's a hospital in Kabul. There are other places, they have requirements of medicine. So here's a very practical proposition. If we have goodwill towards the Afghan people, do we just, stand by and watch them go through a very difficult phase and say, well, sorry, there's nothing we can do about it? Or are we both humane or, sympathetic and practical about it and say, let's find a way of helping them? I would suggest to you, we've taken the second course. We would like to keep that relationship with the Afghan people going, and that's really what is, driving us. On the Armenia Azerbaijan negotiations, in fact, I just had the foreign minister of Armenia here recently. We have taken the position that if countries have disputes, they should try and sort it out through negotiations without bloodshed. And if they have indeed reached an understanding, then, we would, intuitively, as with any other situation of dispute, we would rather that people discuss and resolve things than to sort it out on the battlefield. So we do stand in favor of peaceful resolution. That's our position. It's not a secret. So when the occasion arises, I don't think we have any hesitation in making that known. On de-dollarization, look, this is not an ideological issue. It's not a national prestige issue. It's a very practical economic issue. There are many countries today who are having problems trading because they don't have access to hard currency. There are also concerns about the stability of the international economic order. And this international economic order, the most influential currency is obviously the dollar. So we have to ask ourselves a very sensible question. Do you want to add to the stability or you want to add to the instability in the world? So I'm very clear, I want to add to the stability at a time when the world economy is already under stress. So I don't see this, we have never seen this as a political issue. We have no political agenda against the dollar. I see this as a stabilization issue for the global economy. On the question from our Kenyan colleague about the Africa Summit, yes, we intended to hold the next Africa Summit, which was supposed to be actually 5 years initially after the first one. Unfortunately, we hit the COVID at that time. It didn't happen. Then we got into a very complicated conversation in Africa, where there was a divergence of view on how exactly Africa should be engaging us. So we wanted our African partners to resolve it among themselves. We are very keen to hold a meeting. My expectation is in the not very distant future, you will see an Indian-Africa meeting in some format which is obviously acceptable both to our African partners and to us. On the ASEAN, is there an impediment with ASEAN? Generally speaking, no. Physically speaking, yes. The biggest impediment I have right now is we're trying to build a highway through Myanmar, which will reach Thailand and then go on to Vietnam. If we can actually build that highway, believe me, it would be a game changer, because it would mean really a road maybe from Haiphong and Da Nang all the way to Calcutta and Delhi and wherever. So the land connectivity is a big challenge. We are working on that. To my mind, it will require us to look at the Myanmar situation in a very different way if we are to progress this particular initiative. Other than that, there are no impediments per se. I mean, we certainly think our trade and economic dealings will improve if the ASEAN would stop stalling on the review of the ITICA, the Goods and Trades Agreement, where they've been walking it very, very slowly. But there could be a bigger ambition. We have a bigger ambition. We would like them to have one as well. On the marketing India, I assume not just for the M&A community, but in a larger way. It is a big, I would say, it's a big focus for us. You would be surprised, or maybe not, on the extent to which today we spend time engaging, potential investors, economic players, domestically, internationally, as a way of getting them to understand our policies better. I think we are, we are still in a zone where especially foreign players want deeper engagement to get a better understanding. It's not self-explanatory. Sometimes countries reach that phase, a country like US or many of the other developed countries have had a track record long enough that you know what it is about. You don't need to go to the government and ask them questions about their policy stability or reform intentions for you to make an investment decision. I think we are still in that zone. We are conscious we are in that zone, and we are making efforts really to engage and to heighten the sense of confidence in the investor community.
Great. I think, Minister, we are 3 minutes over time. I had promised you 21:45. So let me thank you for doing this year after year, coming and spending time with us. And please applaud the Minister for his interventions and for taking the time.